Hello and welcome to Eye of the Storm. This is a game between Weedwhacker and Derek Bobjack, two fairly low ratings, so ratings of a noob who's played a few games, but has potential to, just by changing a couple things, players in this region can usually become much better. And typically it's something like learning one really good strategy and then copying it successfully over and over. Then suddenly you have that strategy, something like Deck 1 land spam, and you get this map. And that's one of the difficulties of learning this game. You dream up all these things and then you get some random map where those things don't work at all. So it's really a map dependent. So at first you learn these map dependent strategies that work. And later on, if you're actually to become a very good player, is to learn something that is not map dependent. And there really are a few players who can do that. And also if you look at things like tourneys, a lot of players really like to see the maps beforehand so they can make things perfect or come up with some good idea. And typically it's impossible to take on players who do that unless you do the same thing. But that's another very good way to learn this game. Derek Bobjack running around with a build order of a mass extractor, 4 PGens. This mass extractor quite late. Looks like a factory with a total of 8 PGens. That's going to be pretty heavy on power if he chooses to take that Hydra. Which doesn't look like he is. I'm definitely going to speed this up. And a massive engineering group coming out. So it looks like the top is going to be claimed by Derek unless something can be done by Weedwhacker. And Weedwhacker here with third air, very aggressive on air. You can only do that if you have plenty of power. It looks like Weedwhacker has that. And in terms of this initial build, I gotta say Weedwhacker way better. I mean, it just doesn't look like these two players are in the same league. But they probably are. And this is where this bomber cutting out any of these engineers. And actually you can see the way Derek Bobjack is played is from his first factory he just produced a whole bunch of engineers which he unprotected sent everywhere. So even though he is losing engineers to a rating, the rating is weak enough that Bobjack is actually able to overwhelm the entire map. Ideally, if you're a Weedwhacker, you would have multiple raids and you would scout the enemy's base so that you would see that they're pretty much screwed. But Weedwhacker, the opposite, a lot of military units, not enough engineers to grab all this mass. Also, did you grab that reclaim? Looks like you did. Yeah, you definitely know about the reclaim. So, wow, very different play styles. Weedwhacker, what we saw there was a very good opening. And then suddenly things just didn't go so well because of this mass. So you don't want to have your opening end up here. When your opening ends up here, you know that you've basically made enough power. Looks like, yeah, you've definitely made enough factories. It's one thing not to, this is a huge amounts of factories, and this 1,000 mass could have that in the bank. What these will do is they will lead to a whole bunch of land units, but it will all be slowed down because this really heavy investment while the economy was negative. Weedwhacker beginning to actually, wow, Derek has Rush Tech 2. Very, very unusual gameplay, which you can see. The way Derek's playing is very defensive, very aggressive with the engineers, but very defensive in terms of military units, just stationary anti-air. Then some Tech 1 PDs. Expensive, but when you put them into a right place, they get the job for you. There is an RD moving in from Weedwhacker. In terms of Navy, we do see a couple of frigates coming out, and Weedwhacker now actually getting a Apologies about that technical difficulty. But in the meantime, what has happened is all the PDs so far are winning. There is a bunch of RD here, but you got to micro it. And Derek Bobjack, meanwhile, has got Tech 2 in his ACU and is using his early map control to invest back into his base, and actually already rushing a Tech 3 mask extractor. So looking at Derek Bobjack, it was like a splash of build capacity, which was then stopped and turned into Tech. Meanwhile, the build capacity did enough to hold the map for 13 minutes. But I think, yeah, now finally the RDs are going to get the job done. And that will be a problem. One thing that Bobjack did do is make way too many PDs and not enough walls. The wall PD combination is very good. Also, no air, so no scouting. He is assuming that there is a Navy coming, so he's made a torpedo launcher, although it looks like Weedwhacker is just not aggressive enough and still not scouting the enemy base. You gotta know what the heck is happening, what your enemy is doing. Also missing out on this. This is usually in the first few minutes people rush this position because of this reclaim. Also these mask extractors, this close Hydra. But that has not happened. Also this little chunk of mass, which is kind of hidden, about 300 mass. And yet another PD creating a problem. Engineers, critical engineers for Weedwhacker. Once Weedwhacker grabs all this plus all the reclaim, he should have a bigger income. Of course, we do know Bobjack here actually finished with a Tech 3. But the Tech 3 takes 60 power, so Bobjack power stalling when he already has Tech 2 power. Looks like we got to upgrade a mask extractor here. His build capacity is a rover. Yeah, this is quite bizarre. The initial burst of map control is now nearly gone except for the middle. And these middle units, no kills. Actually, Weedwhacker, what did he do with his ACU? I do see Tech 2 land, the HQ right here. Tech 2 land means Tech 2 flak, also means that T2 PDs won't be able to counter. Now cruiser. So Weedwhacker blindly making some very good units. He has also upgraded to Tech 2, but only 3 Tech 2 mask extractors. So it's the map control that's really keeping him in the game in terms of the mass. And what we're seeing here is all these units are extremely powerful, but you can't make the call to send them in if you've never scouted. And you don't know how powerful they are. So, yeah, we all know if you look at Observer that all you gotta do is give a move order. They'll probably do a little micro and killing off those RDs. Grabbing all this mass is nice. That Hydro, not to neglect. Also all the reclaim. Some bombers, and this is not the way to take on a position that has an anti-air turret. I think this is where the ACU, if the ACU went to the middle, would have been pretty useful. Medusas take out Tech 1 PDs. We are also seeing Tech 2 Navy breaking down the barriers. So Weedwhacker here is completely dominating everything. So it's in position like this, it's if you're not going to scout, then at least make engineers. So number one thing, scout, see what your enemy is doing, and then second thing, when you're winning, make sure you do as much as possible with the map that you've gained, which means reclaim, build defenses, get mask extractors. Otherwise, you've denied the mass, it's free, and you don't take it. That's pretty inexcusable. Bobjack, wow. That's definitely an expensive unit, but he can afford it at 101. So this base, it looks like finally Bobjack realizes this Tech 2 is going Tech 1 straight to Tech 3. And this is a very powerful ACU. Still at Tech 2, but a lot of T2 PDs. He does have a Tech 2 Navy of his own. It's actually a Tech 2 torpedo launcher. This is something not to neglect, especially with these RDs. Bobjack, this RD's got a good range, and I think this is where Weedwhacker needed to scout and see that he is totally outgunned. All he's got is the range, but yeah, this is a critical loss. This is where Weedwhacker did not need to attack. Needed to just take over the map. How many kills does this thing have? 30. That's the most deadly Tech 1 anti-air in history. You don't need Tech 3 mobile anti-air. Oh my goodness. So very well placed Tech 1 RA, 34 kills. Very painful. These units just parading, happy in their ignorant bliss. But what's actually happening? What's actually happening is that on the economy end, Bobjack now, what is he getting? Not clear, maybe getting Tech 3, but he's got a stronger navy than Weedwhacker has now. Weedwhacker's sticking to cruisers, which is very strange. I think going with Tech 2, oh, it's all cruisers. Either destroyers or actually when you're facing UEF, building up a whole bunch of Tech 2 submarines, especially when your enemy doesn't see that. They become very powerful. So these units here are very weak. And if you force your enemy to make Coopers, you know you've already won. Then you just switch to destroyers and run them over, or with frigates. And that's really where UEF is quite weak in the matchups, unless of course it has the numbers like Derek has. So I really like the way Derek played that. It was perfect against this player. He took map control when it was necessary. The slow aggression from Weedwhacker allowed him to get enough mass to really tech up, so then when actual slow troops of Weedwhacker made it to Derek Bobjack's base, he already had such a powerful ACU, such powerful defenses, that these units are really now obsolete. You can't attack this base with land unless you got Tech 3. Even with Tech 3, these very expensive units, this is 6,000 mass just sitting there. It's basically the price of this Tech 3 mass extractor and the mass storages. Huge amounts of the. Sometimes it's nice to look at the base and see where the mass has been invested. So it's about 4,000, 5,000 in these. It's another 2,600. Big chunks. Basically 6,000, 6,000, 6,000. It's all in that Tech 3 mass extractors, which are now producing 122 mass. As this Cybern versus, and this is where actually Derek Bobjack is making a mistake. He might not realize these are all cruisers, so against cruisers, you make a couple of destroyers, and if your destroyer gets anywhere close to a Cybern cruiser, that cruiser dies very quickly. Just the difference in health and direct fire. The thing that the cruiser can do, of course, is attempt to kite, and actually on this map, you can run away quite effectively. Appears that the cruiser spam continues. It'll take bad micro from Bobjack to lose against these cruisers, but it is possible. Meanwhile, still a lot of Tech 1 mass extractors from Weedwhacker, who actually is now, yeah, he's sitting on 25 Tech 1 mass extractors. That's nearly as good as 2 Tech 3 mass extractors. Bobjack, what does he have? He has 3 of these and nothing else. He's got some engineers moving out. 7,400 reclaimed. Oh, a fatty. That's expensive. That's where a lot of the power is going. Also, wow, this. So instead of doing this, this much mass could have already gotten him a Tech 3 factory, which he's getting, and a Tech 3 ship. It's just huge. This fatty, and he's getting that very quickly. He is getting some reclaim somewhere, but building the fatty together with this Tech 3 factory is not the best way to do it. Weedwhacker, meanwhile, looks like still just Tech 2s. Lots of build capacity on the Tech 2, and this is where a lot of factions at the Tech 2 stage are actually quite vulnerable against T2 torpedo bombers. But the one faction that really isn't is EAF. With these shield boats, which are so wide, they can really counter Tech 2 torpedo boats, which don't have a lot of firepower. Their thing is that they specifically hit a ship. They don't miss unless, of course, there is torpedo defense. And this is where, with this assault, which is quite nice, you got to get these onto dry land and kill. Oh, the Fatty finished in a perfect time. Oh man, these crews are still doing a decent job because the micro from Bobjack isn't very good. Their Bobjack is running away. If these couple of destroyers went close, I mean, some of them accidentally have shot these ships and they died. But this victory, this naval victory, is very much undeserved by Weedwhacker. It only happened because Derek was not aggressive with his navy, but Derek was aggressive enough with his eco, and it's got a Fatty. He's also got Tech 3 PDs. This is a rich man's base. No garbage. Just very high tech units, very expensive units. It's all very localized, and there will be a lot of veterans. Looks like this is such an expensive thing to build. So what to do if you're a Weedwhacker? You've just lost this fight. The worst thing you can do is to continue the pressure here, because it's not really pressure, it's just suiciding your units. The most important thing to do here would be to continue to deny any expansion and use the fact that you have more mass extractors and just start upgrading. As soon as you start upgrading, you're gonna just completely run away from Bobjack. And then Tech 3 Air is the most obvious thing, and well, that's a volley. That's an overkill right there. Is he making more? He's got 7, it's gonna be a Tech 3 shield. He's working on a battleship. Oh, this HQ nearly died too. And this Fatty isn't really gonna stop. I think it can make it all the way around the map. Some free Tech 1 mass extractors that nobody seems to want. And one mistake that Weedwhacker is making is that he continues to produce Tech 1 units at this stage where they're really not that good. So it's each one of these about 30 mass, each mantis 50. At 20 of these, 20 Manta, and you can get yourself another destroyer. This is just amazing. I've never seen this before, Fatty in this position, but it's actually quite vulnerable there. It doesn't have a lot of health. The best thing that it can do is use its range to kite, but I think Weedwhacker is just going to come in one at a time, and that's not going to work out. So he's saying he sucks, which yeah, in some ways, yes. I think both these players have shown some unusual gameplay, which is not optimal, but I think Weedwhacker, yeah, just more aggression. I mean, the production of units was good. More aggression on the assault and scouting, and more aggression with the engineers. I think scouting was the critical thing. And then a couple micro mistakes which weren't taken advantage of. Fatty produced a bunch of Tech 3. So this is like a castle. So Bobjack is just a slow motion player. He's not going to move until he has an experimental to put to all these expansions. Is he making another? No, Bobjack is a builder. One thing that he's not doing is reclaiming, and imagine, no, he's got plenty of mass. 27,000 reclaimed. Making cruisers, he's got the battleship, it's just completely outranging all that. Weedwhacker, does he even know what's happening? He should. Now he retreats. And the way he's using the Wagner is as if it's Seraphim or Aeon Tech 2 tank. think the Wagner, this situation is to sneak in into these positions, or with a main assault to come out and maybe kill the shields. They don't have, of course, to go on the ground and or on the ocean floor, and their torpedo is extremely weak. We are seeing Weedwhacker building up a significant Tech 2 Air Force. Thing is, this battleship has 51,000 health. The Fatty returns home. It's a pacifist Fatty. Another battleship. And I'm really gonna speed this up because even though Weedwhacker has more mass, he's actually had more mass for a little while. He's really invested it in much cheaper units than Bobjack. Bobjack is really investing in, well, now he's investing into a satellite, which is just ridiculous. So I think I found Weedwhacker investing in Strat bombers. So that's not a bad choice, but I think under these circumstances with these incomes, making Soul Ripper, these kinds of units are quite good, except when somebody is playing like Bobjack, which I agree is very unusual. When somebody's playing Tech 3 shields and a whole bunch of Tech 3 AA against you, sniping them is not the best thing to do. I think this is where a megalith through the water or the bug, even the bug might be a little weak, but the bug would be good at preventing any fatties or any experimentals from attacking you, because if you're a Weedwhacker, you might anticipate a land assault together with the fatty. Of course, the fatty can produce a nice posse of Perseus if it chose to do so. But looks like Derek is just going to focus on producing his Tech 3 Navy. Oh, and here come the strats. Okay, and so this is where the selection of targets. So what we just saw was like 8 Tech 3 bombers, which is 16,000 mass. Attack a unit that even if they would have killed it would have made absolutely no difference. Yeah, there's really no reason to attack that. The only unit that he could have really attacked would be Bobjack, who's 18,000 health, but if he's standing next to some Tech 3 P-Gens, and actually here, depending on where the bombs fall, it's just a single Tech 3 shield. So if you have like 8 plus a whole bunch of Tech 2 bombers, I think he could have done it going along the side, maybe avoiding the cruisers. I think he had enough to at least try to kill Bobjack. The naval battle he's pretty much lost unless you want Megalith or a very heavy Tech 3 battleship spam, but of course we did not see it. And this is just fancy ships, 46 kills versus some very weak ships. So if you're below 1,000, strategies like what Bobjack just showed us are actually quite effective, and Spider, which I did not see. Although I think that Spider would have, yeah, it would have been massacred by all this. So hopefully people enjoyed it.